This Sunday school lesson is called Fulfilling the Law. Scripture text is the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verses 13 through 20. Matthew 5, verses 13 through 20. Check out anything in the description box because a lot of times I forget to add certain things in the video. So check the description box just in case I have anything other to add. Okay, so this is for July 7th, 2019, and we're going to start with Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. This is the New Living Translation version.
You are the salt of the earth. But what good is salt if it has lost its flavor? Can you make it salty again? It will be thrown out and trampled underfoot as worthless. You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket. Instead, a lamp is placed on a stand where it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see, so that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. Teaching about the law. Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose.
Reading commentary. If a seasoning has no flavor, it has no value. If Christians make no effort to affect the world around them, they are of little value to God. If we are too much like the world, we will be ineffective as Christians. Christians should not blend in with everyone else. Instead, we should affect others positively, just as seasoning brings out the best flavor in food. Can you hide a city that is sitting on top of a mountain? Its lights at night can be seen for miles. If we live for Christ, we will glow like lights, showing others what Christ is like. We hide our light by being quiet when we should speak, going along with the crowd, denying the light, letting sin dim our light, not explaining our light to others, or ignoring the needs of others. Be a beacon of truth. Don't shut your light off from the rest of the world. God's moral and ceremonial laws were given to help people love God with all their hearts and minds. Throughout Israel's history, however, these laws had often been misquoted and misapplied. By Jesus' time, religious leaders had turned the laws into a confusing mass of rules. When Jesus talked about a new way to understand God's law, he was actually trying to bring people back to its original purpose. Jesus did not speak against the law itself, but against the abuses and the excesses to which it had been subjected. See John 1, verse 17. If Jesus did not come to abolish the law, does that mean all the Old Testament laws still apply to us today? In the Old Testament, there were 3 categories of law: ceremonial, civil, and moral. Continuing with verse 18.
I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of God's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys God's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
The 3 laws: ceremonial, civil, and moral. 1. Ceremonial law. The ceremonial law related specifically to Israel's worship. See Leviticus chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Its primary purpose was to point forward to Jesus Christ. These laws, therefore, were no longer necessary after Jesus' death and resurrection. While we are no longer bound by ceremonial law, the principles behind them to worship and love a holy God still apply. Jesus was often accused by the Pharisees of violating ceremonial law. 2. Civil law. The civil law applied to daily living in Israel. See Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 10 and 11. Because of modern society and culture are so radically different from that time and setting, all of these guidelines cannot be followed specifically. But the principles behind the commands are timeless and should guide our conduct. Jesus demonstrated these principles by example. 3. Moral law. The moral law, such as the Ten Commandments, is the direct command of God, and it requires strict obedience. See Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. The moral law reveals the nature and will of God, and it still applies today. Jesus obeyed the moral law completely. Some of those in the crowd were experts at telling others what to do, but they missed the central point of God's law themselves. Jesus made it clear, however, that obeying God's law is more important than explaining them. It's much easier to study God's laws and tell others to obey them than to put them into practice yourself. How are you doing at obeying God yourself? The Pharisees were exacting and scrupulous in their attempts to follow their laws. So how could Jesus reasonably call us to greater righteousness than theirs? The Pharisees' weakness was that they were content to obey the laws of God outwardly without allowing God to change their hearts or attitudes. They looked pious, but they were far from the kingdom of heaven. God judges our hearts as well as our deeds, for it is the heart that our real allegiance lies. Jesus was saying that his listeners needed a different kind of righteousness altogether out of love for God, not just a more intense version of the Pharisees' obedience, which was more legal compliance. Our righteousness must, 1, come from what God does in us, not what we can do by ourselves. 2, be God-centered, not self-centered. 3, be based on reverence for God, not approval from people. And 4, go beyond keeping the law to living by the principles behind the law. We should be just as concerned about our attitudes that people don't see as about our actions that are seen by all. This concludes Sunday School Lesson, International Sunday School Version. If this has helped you in any way, do not forget to thumbs up the video, share, and subscribe.